Martha Cushing was primarily responsible for the forming of the organization, as I recall, and kind of held it together during its lean years. And Martha and Virginia Cushing did a lot of work.
August 4th, 1949. Gentlemen, several times in the past few years, the suggestion has been made to the various telephone companies and their managers in the territory that some type of telephone organization be formed to meet and exchange ideas and formulate more or less uniform policies that would be beneficial to all concerned. We are all faced with practically the same problems, and in most instances they vary considerably from those found in exchanges in the States. It was recently brought to our attention that the majority of the telephone company owners and managers in the territory would be invited to Anchorage the end of September for the cutover of the Anchorage system. This would be an opportune time for those companies interested to meet and discuss their mutual problems. Telephone businesses in Alaska is fast growing, and it is important that we be ready for further legislation and conditions that can and will arise. Also, in view of the fact that statehood is a likelihood, and we will then be made to meet Federal Communications Commission requirements as well as statehood requirements, it might be well if an Alaska Telephone Association would be in existence and prepared to meet the situation with the united front. Yours very truly, Martha Cushing, Sitka Telephone Company.
The history of modern communications in Alaska began in about 1900 when the U.S. Army began construction of the Washington-Alaska Military Cable and Telegraph System.
It was called the Womcats. They were basically ran a telegraph system from Valdez up to Eagle, but I think it also may have came into Valdez and into Fairbanks and maybe into Whitehorse.
Until 1971, long-distance service in Alaska was provided by the U.S. military because of Alaska's strategic importance.
Because it was to the national interest to have people here and to have communications in and out of Alaska. It was World War II taught us that it was very vital to the Anchorage and many of the surrounding areas to be able to talk and have communications when we were invaded. And the invasion was a lot bigger than a lot of people really realized. Even today, a lot of people don't realize the action that took place out on the chain and stuff. Of course, we used to use White Alice system, and that was a radio system that we used. And most of the outlying areas would use channel equipment off of the radio, and that would go to White Alice. White Alice would pipe it back into Anchorage.
Lack of funds, harsh climates, inadequate long-distance links. Local companies faced many challenges in providing service to Alaskan towns and villages.
It took so much capital to build the exchanges, and there were either going to be enough customers that would be a paying concern, or it wouldn't. There was no magic formula that ensured that if you had X cost and X investment, you would make Y return. That wasn't it at all. It was all purely a risk equation.
The other major challenge is just conducting business and maintaining a system reliably and efficiently in a very high-cost, rural, harsh weather environment.
It may seem strange in 1999 that to think that just 30 years ago or 35 years ago there were communities in Alaska that didn't have telephone service, but in fact, as anyone who's been active in ATA for any time knows, as recently as the early and mid 80s, there were many many, dozens of communities in Alaska that had no telephone service.
Or most communities only had one phone. Before that, they didn't even have a phone. They had to work with CB radios, VHF radios, and so forth, and they couldn't always get through.
In the early days, you know, to place a long-distance call was almost impossible. It'd take you hours to get a call through.
We didn't have a payphone because people would come to my house to make phone calls, long-distance phone calls, and then we'd have to wait for time and charges, you know. And we ended up, I had always the coffee pot on and the cookie jar full, you know, because people would come and they'd sometimes make an afternoon of it by the time the time and charges came back, you know.
Alaskan phone companies have also had to face natural disasters, such as floods in Fairbanks and the Good Friday earthquake in south central Alaska.
64, when the earthquake hit, which basically tore up everything. The telephone, all the batteries turned over, the salt water came in and washed the switch down with acid and salt water. Which
the tide come in, it just kept right on coming, and it just buried the town of Valdez, just destroyed everything. And when that thing hit, I didn't even know what it was. My neighbor had to tell me, and we went down Bernard Road, and God, we saw the liquor store, the liquor coming out, you know, from everything on there, and the TV set over in the Montgomery Ward Showcase, so on. But it was so bad, I figured that, you know, it'd probably be over with up there, but it was just the opposite. The government come in there and rebuilt, and especially the municipally owned telephone companies, they were eligible for government aid, and they got it. I mean, they come in and replaced our PBXs. They paid for new construction on our duct system that was damaged. So the federal government poured in all kinds of money, and it really made the whole thing better instead of going down the toilet like I thought it was going to. It did just the opposite.
The biggest benefit of ATA is them being able to get together, the members, the regular members, being able to get together and share the concerns they have. They've all got challenges. Some of them are different, but they're all in local exchange telephony in the state of Alaska. So many of them are the same. And for them to get together and realize that the problem they're facing at any time of year is not utterly unique. Somebody else is facing it and dealing with it. Maybe has a solution, or maybe doesn't have a solution yet, but at least they can work on it together.
I think the real value of the association has always been that there's strength in numbers. You know, when we can achieve consensus and go into both legislative and regulatory issues or problems.
The training that's received, the training that's given, don't ever stop training.
Some of the benefits are just visiting with those folks and finding out what they're doing and sharing information with one another. It's always great to get together and have some fun.
And we had other issues before the Public Utilities Commission and Congress and state legislature that our participation with the ATA helped us promote those issues collectively. And that worked fine then, continues to work fine now.
The Alaska Telephone Association awards scholarships yearly to students in the telecommunications field. Many of the recipients have gone on to rewarding careers in Alaska telecommunications. The association has also funded a program in telecommunications management at Alaska Pacific University.
ATA was the founder of the Telecommunications Management Program at APU. A group of industry representatives, including many people who are associate members, got together and donated money and set up a foundation to donate money to APU to establish the program. Several member companies from ATA recognized that the telephone industry was changing back in the early 90s. They looked ahead and saw competition coming. They saw the need to be more business-driven, more market-driven, more customer-driven, and they decided they needed to train their managers that were coming up in this kind of skill.
We've been real fortunate to have FCC commissioners come up here to the state in the last couple of years. In '96, we had Commissioner Rochelle Chong come up. She's no longer on the commission. And in '97, we had Commissioner Susan Ness. And in '98, we had both Chairman Kennard and Commissioner Furch-Gott Roth, and they came up separately. And we're fortunate taking them around the state. We realized that they had no concept of what rural was till they saw Alaska. The state speaks for itself.
And I think my first general awareness of the association was in the late 70s when they were looking for a new executive director. Walt Saunderson, who'd been with ATA for many years, retired. And they ultimately whittled down their list of applicants to two folks, one of whom was Gordon Parker. And as I recall, listening to some of the conversations, there was a consensus that Gordon was their man, but there was a minority that was quite concerned. In fact, some of the majority was concerned that this kid had way too much hair and had been known to grow a beard from time to time, and they were generally aware that he was a Democrat.
I came on board with ATA in November of 1979.
You know, if I had any contribution to the organization, it was probably 20 years ago when we, we brought some focus as an organization to the activities.
And it was very, very, very advantageous to the ATA to have Gordon come on board. He did a beautiful job.
With the Alaska Telephone Association, who had just hired Gordon Parker and myself, Gordon a few months prior to me, as their full-time staff. They'd never had full-time staff before. It was all basically on a volunteer basis, and the board members and different like secretaries and treasurers would take care of the notes and the records up until that point. And I set up the offices for ATA. I had cardboard boxes to work out of, and and lots of records and pictures, really interesting things, but nothing had really, because it had been at so many different places in different hands. It was all there, it just hadn't been organized or anything yet. So.
We took the step of sort of formalizing the associate members, well, sometime probably in the mid-'80s, when we amended the bylaws and gave them created an associate members committee, and with the chairman sitting as a non-voting member on the board. And we did that just to put some structure on around the associate members' activities. We started the showcase, I believe it was about 1984. Bernie Murray was president over the organization then. Some of the associate members had talked to us about the problems they were having in having an opportunity to meet with the working folks, the folks who they really needed to talk to sell their products.
If the Telephone Association was not doing that, then who would be? And who has the most interest in having those conventions there and having consumers come and having a forum where the industry can display the latest technologies that are available and make those technologies available to consumers, and then also to other carriers, and have a forum within which we can present those technologies.
As obviously, I mean, you get to see all of the new product lines that are out there, and having it within the state allows a considerable greater number of people from the plant side of the house, from the companies, to get in to see all that stuff. So, I mean, it just keeps them up to date on what's available out there, and that allows them to provide better service.
Now it's a tremendous thing. It's probably the premier technical show in Alaska today.
The association honors an associate member every year at our annual meeting. It is typically for an associate member who has gone beyond the call of duty.
The Fickle Finger of Fate was initiated by, I believe, Dick Cushing. He was a great master of ceremonies, and he utilized that finger to a great extent to emphasize points during meetings.
And let's see, I've received the Smooth Talker Award, the Fickle Finger of Fate Award, and then there was something called the Weasel Award. I think I've gotten that one too, and I enjoy receiving, but probably more than receiving those awards, I enjoy presenting those awards, because once you receive those awards, you get to, you have the ability to turn around and then present them, and that's a lighthearted affair.
The one that I'm most proud of is the Retired Assoc Award, and today that is hanging in my my house.
I've never quite figured out why, but my last year as president, I received both the Cushing-Kaguyak Award, which is for the individual that's done the most for the industry, and the Assoc Award in the same year. And I'm not sure how you can be the greatest guy and the biggest Assoc in the same year, but that's what happened to me.
We did originate a few of them too during my time. The Smooth Talker Award. That came about. A spouse of one of the executives of one of the companies, and I won't name the company, was kind of critical of a member of the commission. And unbeknown, that member of the commission was sitting at the table. And when she found out what she had done, she was totally embarrassed and apologized. And we came up with the idea of the Smooth Talker Award, and it was a jar of peanut butter.
The winter conference came about actually from the joint board on offshore states and contiguous, non-contiguous states and territories that was very active in the early 80s. They held a hearing in Honolulu, and Marv Weatherly, who was at that time chairman of the commission here in Alaska, was on that joint board. And he called me up on the phone and he said, we're going over here to this joint board.
And somebody said, you know, that was so popular and so successful, we ought to do that on a regular basis.
We've had Alaska Public Utilities.
To date in the areas of settlements and how our money was to be distributed. It brought us closer to the national scene as to what was going on in Washington, D.C.
Very enlightening for the membership.
It's probably one in the nation, among the telephone associations.
And I think ATA...
A lot of good.
The people are very friendly, very courteous, and very willing to help.
The growth of a state is dependent upon its ability to communicate. And the Alaska Telephone Association and the companies in this state have done a great job of developing communications.
I have nothing but advocating in the committees, standing job. I think ATA is a great and very progressive organization that is meeting or attempting to meet all of its members. One thing I will say about ATA is you had nothing but good work and do a lot of good things too, but it was a very close-knit bunch of telephone people that did enjoy having a good time.
A great group of people to work with through the association, and we've accomplished a lot. We have a lot more to accomplish in the future.
For the association are very similar, I think, to the challenges in the industry, and that is, where are we going?
The future of the telephone industry in Alaska is going to be one of new technologies, challenges that are brought on by both.
Today, compared to the way things were 30 years ago, the cost of technology keeps going down, it keeps going up. And the reality is, fewer people can accomplish, many people to accomplish 20 or 30 years ago.
The telephone company has so much on its plate today that where they go and what they do is incomprehensible. Anything you can dream of, I think that they'll be able to achieve in the next 5-10 years.
Laugh at Dick Tracy's watch. I think Dick Tracy's right around the corner, if he isn't already walking down the street.
So I think ultimately we get to a point where your service at your home or your business is metered, video, internet, what have you. I think at some point it just all merges and it's all metered. And then the next big question is, was it coming through the pipe that the telephone company has in your house, or is it coming through the pipe that the CATV company has in your house? Bill Gates and the McCaw brothers put up.
The only thing you're sure of is change. And things will change.
For a blow-by-blow, first-hand account of some of the more wild goings-on in previous ATA conventions, you'd really have to talk to Gordon Parker, Jack Reiner, one of those guys. I was usually at Mass.
That's a good question.
Fred McGrady, who was a peddler for Stromberg Carlson, bought a bunch of pigeons. And during the banquet, he released these pigeons. You know, and the next thing you know, everybody's looking around at the pigeons up in the chandelier, and then the next thing you know, they're trying to cover their plates.
I remember my first meeting that I went to with Max Clemens, and the then chairman of the FCC was there. And he got up and gave a speech about competition, and in the back of the room, this gentleman arose in his polyester leisure suit and said, point of order, he wanted the floor, and they gave him the floor, and he laid into the chairman of the FCC like you wouldn't believe. Told him he was chopping up Solomon's baby, and he didn't want a piece of Solomon's baby, and he should hie his butt back to Washington where he belonged. And I said, who in the hell is that? And Max Clemens said, well, that's the Heller from Teller.
I have a photographic memory, but I seem to be out of film at the moment.
In the real old days, remember you guarded your room number with your life, because you could wind up with a hell of a bar tab the next morning if somebody found out what your room number was. Of course, most of that was before my time.
Those are the kind of stories that can't be told, but those who are made unhappy will remember.
There were many, many, many ATA stories over the years, most of which you'd question which were true, and most of which, for some of those who were there, would insist they'd been watered down. Most of them are so good, I'm not sure I want to share them on tape.
I don't know where that my fickle finger of fate, you know, we had to lock that up in a chest someplace, I guess.
Since I've been here, I've had my assistant, Joyce Losnegard, and I'd like to say to Joyce,